Hey couples, we're Brian and Tracy Dwyer, and if you're watching this video, then we want to say congrats because that means you're probably engaged and you're going through this 4-week series with your fiance and with a mentoring couple.
The name of this series is called PreMarriage Basics, and we're going to talk you through some really important basic things you need to have in place for your marriage to be healthy from day one.
In this first week, we're going to talk about God's design for marriage, and we'll get to that real soon. And then weeks 2, 3, and 4, we're going to be talking about choosing love, earning trust, and really the last thing is communication. And the picture that we want to show you is what we call the 3 pillars of a healthy marriage.
Yeah, and these have come about after years of doing marriage counseling and just really recognizing that these 3 things, really understanding what love is about, understanding what trust is and what it is not, because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about how trust works in a relationship, and then just the basic principles of how do you talk, how do you resolve conflict. And if you can get these 3 things established and working well in your relationship now, your marriage is going to be a lifelong fun journey that you have ahead of you.
So in this first lesson, we're going to talk about God's design for marriage, which means we're going to take a look at Scripture and see how God defines it. Because after all, marriage is God's idea. It is today, and it always was.
Marriage is defined biblically as one man and one woman joined together for life.
And this comes from Genesis chapter 2, verse 24. It says, "This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one." God was talking here to Adam and Eve. And then Jesus talks about it later on in the New Testament in Matthew 19. He says, "Haven't you read the scriptures? They record that from the beginning, God made them male and female. And this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one." And then Jesus added this, "Since they are no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together."
So one of the key things we want you to draw from that verse is that God's design for marriage was a man and a woman coming together and making a commitment for a lifetime, until death do they part, right? That we say in our vows. God's design for marriage was never that it would end in divorce. And as we see in our culture, divorce unfortunately has become more and more commonplace outside of the church and even inside of the church. So we want to make sure you guys go into your experience of preparing for your marriage, that you understand that what you're about to do is make a lifelong commitment. 2 people becoming one in the eyes of God, and a commitment that isn't broken until death.
See, according to that verse, at marriage, you become one with your spouse. But this new couple's identity, is what we'll call it, doesn't require you to forfeit your individual identities. So Trace, why don't we just unpack this a little bit, because I think this is interesting, and many of you maybe haven't ever heard of this oneness principle, that 2 become one. What does that mean, and what does it not mean?
So in God's eyes, when he's talking about this idea that 2 people come together to make one, that all of your strengths and your weaknesses are coming into this other person with their strengths and weaknesses, and together you're a healthier and whole person with the 2 becoming one. It doesn't mean that giving yourself to your spouse means you have to now not have any of your own interests or your own things that you care about, or your identity now is just only and totally about your marriage. But it's having the right mindset that coming into marriage isn't a selfish pursuit. You are now joining yourself with somebody else, and you're actually saying, you know what? Now it's not just what do I want, what do I need? I'm now making a commitment to someone saying, I want to know what you need and what you want, and how do I meet those needs for you, and vice versa.
Yeah, and again, we'll give you guys a chance to talk about this oneness principle in marriage in just a little bit. But for now, let's just get to this last talking point, because I think it's important for you to understand. Your family of origin, which means, where you came from, where you grew up, had a major impact on who you are today. But for some of you, leaving and cleaving may be a difficult task.
And this can be a sticky and thorny issue for some couples, but that's why it's good to talk about it now on week 1 of your pre-marriage counseling, to recognize that when you're leaving your family, that's what you're doing. You're leaving your family, your traditions, the way your family did things, and you're joining in life with somebody else who came from a different family with different traditions and ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And it's not about trying to force your family of origin stuff on your future spouse. We're making our own family. Let's take the strengths of each of our families and mix them up and make our own family. And the problem with a lot of couples is you have one person that's kind of stuck with, well, I'm gonna just kind of impose all of my family stuff and you just need to kind of come along with how I do things. And that's just not a healthy way to start a relationship. And you wanna make sure your families of origin, mom and dad or whoever you grew up with, understand you're making your own family, you're gonna do things your own way, and it might mean some changes and traditions and other expectations.
Now, we've got many more topics on in-laws if you want to get to some of those conversations, because that's really what we're talking about here is you're gonna have in-laws and you've got to learn how this leaving and cleaving principle plays out with them, but that's for another time. For right now, you've got some homework to do. We want you to take the couples survey. You can find that in the workbook for this series, and be ready to talk about it next week. In fact, we encourage you to snap a picture of that survey result and make sure to send it to your mentor so they can take a peek at it before you meet next week.
So listen, this is an exciting time. Put the work into the next few weeks and really learn what it means to have a healthy marriage, so that on day 1, when you guys say I do, on that fabulous, amazing day you're planning for and looking forward to, that you are ready to go on day 1. So next week, you're gonna be talking about choosing love. It's the first pillar, and it's very important to get the right understanding about what love really is all about, what God means by how we should love versus what our culture around us would like us to believe.